I'm going to take another question from Natalie Kilton.
Given that the fire safety bill has now passed through Parliament without any protection for leaseholders, what can be done right now to prevent the financial ruin of people who are facing unaffordable bills?
Now, Natalie, I know, because you've been on the programme before as part of our QT50 audience, that you are in a particular predicament with it. So just explain to us what your situation is.
So unfortunately, I am trapped in a building at the moment that's got unsafe cladding. It's non-ACM cladding, but I'm not able to sell, I'm not able to move on from my home until that's remediated, and I potentially face the bill for tens of thousands of pounds to put right this issue unless, you know, I'm actually protected legally.
And has anything the government has done so far in terms of the bill that was passed today, or which is for £5 billion, but also for buildings above 18 metres, the developer has to pay. For buildings lower than that, the leaseholders have to pay, but will have access to loans. What situation are you in? Is any of that helping you?
So my building's above 18 metres, so the government have made available the non-ACM fund, but it's very, very limited in scope. It covers very specific types of cladding, and the key thing is fire doesn't discriminate, and it's a lot more than just cladding. There's a lot of fire safety defects that these buildings have, and it's actually come out that basically these buildings haven't been fit for purpose for such a long time, and it's now all coming out, and the government don't seem to be willing to step up and do the right thing and actually protect people's lives, because ultimately this is a safety issue. And if I went out tomorrow and bought a toaster, I'd probably have more legal protection on that toaster than I've had on my biggest purchase that I've pumped my life savings into. And
what is the value of that biggest purchase at the moment?
Zero. This is the thing at the moment. I can't get a valuation on my home. And until the cladding's fixed and we've got an external wall survey, which seems a long time off, I'm going to be trapped here in a valueless home that I've pumped my life savings into.
So, Anne-Marie, the government's managed to get a bill through today, but talk to Natalie. It's not helping her.
So, first of all, you know, I think this has been such a big scandal, and one that the government has wanted to get to grips with, you know, understand the extent of the challenges, and I think the fire safety bill that has gone through today, as you say, Fiona, it is the starting point, and it's that commitment. Robert,
but how can you help Natalie there now? Because this has been going on for some considerable time, obviously since Grenfell, and Natalie's stuck.
So absolutely, and you know, the £5 billion fund is that starting point to make sure that we can start to get to grips with this. They would say it is a huge, you know, logistical exercise, as you know, the extent of the cladding that isn't fit for purpose. But I hear absolutely the point you make, which is, of course, it is more than that. The challenges with fire doors and all the access points and those sorts of issues. And this is, you know, this is a scandal that we are going to have to unravel. But I hope very much that the initial stages are going to be a starting point. But I think that is the challenge with a number of these things, is A, understanding the scale of the problem, which took us a while, I think, to get a full picture across the country, and to find the right tools to help move that forwards. And I think this is a very difficult challenge. And I do feel enormously for Natalie, but I hope very much that this will be a starting point for solutions.
And so when Boris Johnson said we are determined that no leaseholder should have to pay for the unaffordable cost of fixing safety defects that they did not cause are no fault of their own, you've got Natalie there who's facing exactly that when it comes to perhaps not the cladding, but other things like fire breaks, combustible balconies, sprinklers, fire doors. I mean, when he said that, did he just not mean it?
No, he did, and I think that's why I say the fire safety bill is that first stage, and the fund to help get to grips with the complexity and the enormity of this scandal that we have to help to unravel. But I don't for a moment deny that this is a big challenge to deal with, and there is a huge amount of work to be done, both in, you know, physical change work and indeed working out where those challenges are. And I hope, you know, very much that we'll be able to support Natalie and many others in the weeks and months to come.
Well, Des, this is obviously something you were very keen to bring up.
The impact of this bill going through for people like Natalie and the hundreds of thousands of leaseholders is absolutely devastating. I was on the committee last summer. I joined the committee that was scrutinising this particular piece of legislation, and I introduced the principle that leaseholders should not have to pay for fire safety defects that are not of their making, and Liberal Democrats have stood with leaseholders from the very start to the very end. And last night, we were the ones who pushed the amendment again, and we made it absolutely clear to the government that every single leaseholder affected by the cladding and the fire safety scandal would have preferred for that bill to have fallen last night than for it to pass into law, because this bill has now passed into law, and leaseholders who have already received enormous bills for £50,000, £60,000, £70,000 are now possibly going to receive even more bills, possibly in a matter of days, and they cannot afford to pay it. So they are trapped.
So
who
do you think should be paying that bill? Do you think the government can, in fact, put the onus on developers to pay it? It might bankrupt some of them, I don't know. Or do you think ultimately it'll be the government, therefore the taxpayer, who pays it?
First of all, let me say that I introduced this principle 10 months ago. 10 months ago, and for 10 months the government has refused to come up with a system to sort this out. So it's on the government for not coming forward with a system. I support what the Cladding Action Group is calling for, which is to say the government should stump up the money in the first instance to remediate and make these homes safe, because they are fire traps, they are death traps. It is outrageous that almost 4 years on from the Grenfell tragedy, we think it's okay for people to live in these kind of places. So the government should stump up the cash, then it should very quickly put in a system to get as much of that money back as possible from the people who are responsible. But leaseholders need to know that they are protected because they can't afford to pay the bills. They're stuck in death trap flats. Some of them are facing bankruptcy. Some of them have become homeless. And if some of them who are not bankrupt yet but do become bankrupt may invalidate their legal professional qualifications and ruin their careers. This is a national scandal of epic proportions. The government has had 10 months to come up with a solution to this, and they've refused to do so.
Tim.
I agree. This really is a scandal. Grenfell was in 2017. It was a man-made disaster. And as well as the people directly involved in it, it has also had terrible human repercussions for thousands of others. People who found themselves not just living in apparently unsafe accommodation, but also, as a result, financially stuck, unable to move out, unable to do anything, facing extraordinary costs. And what the government has thus far offered has been in a mixture of grants and loans, and some of them proceeding very slowly, simply isn't enough to meet that. The government has, I'm afraid I agree, in the first instance got to cop up the cash. It's, as the Lib Dems say quite rightly, it then needs to claw it back from the private contractors, who in most cases are the people actually responsible for this particular scandal. We also need to know precisely what accommodation is safe, what isn't safe. We need to see that which is not safe improved immediately, because to stress, just to finish by repeating, it's not just a financial problem, it's also that technically people are living in unsafe accommodation. And that simply should not be allowed to happen.
Colette?
So there's a couple of things here. I mean, who's liable for this? I mean, poor Natalie, if she had a fire now, is she insured? Why has it took 4 years, and what's it going to take to actually get somebody to do something about this and make sure these buildings are safe for people to live in? 4 years, and we don't even know which ones are safe yet. And why should the leaseholders be left with this bill? It should predominantly be the contractors, or actually the planning departments and safety departments that actually pass these off. Somebody somewhere has to take responsibility for this, and it should not be the leaseholder.
Joe?
And where are the insurers in this?
Joe?
Hi, yeah, I'd like to go back to Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, you've alluded that this is the first step in a measure of steps that the government are going to take. I'd like to know what those next steps might be and how that could maybe offer some reassurance to the people that are currently living in fear and are in financial hardship. I think Grenfell's nearly 4 years ago. I think the government's had 4 years to consider the position, to gather the data, to consult with industry experts, to perhaps come forward with some suggestions and a roadmap. Whilst I understand this does offer some relief, evidently it does not resolve the problem, and it leaves many, many people in a very hopeless and desperate situation. So perhaps you could tell me what your thoughts are on the roadmap.
So when is it going to be resolved for someone like Natalie then, Anne-Marie? When is Natalie going to be in a position where she's not going to have to be stumping up for these things that are through no fault of her own? She's living in unsafe accommodation.
So I think that's the challenge that government has, and I think,
But what's the answer?
So as I'm not Rob Jenrick, I can't give you the detail of that continuing plan, but I think the reality is...
If you know this is just the start, you must have some idea what's coming next.
Well, no, I think that what I see and you know, the way, you know, any great challenge is tackled is that there's been this huge amount of analysis to work out how big the problem is, and it is indeed much larger than perhaps was initially understood. And the challenge is with this first, with the bill to actually set this in place and the funds to help move that forwards. But there is an ongoing challenge. So there's obviously the work that's been done now to make sure that, you know, cladding is now safe, that we aren't going to be ever using the sort of unsafe cladding that was there.
And there's still a long way to go on that, as I'm sure you
know.
But
I think that's right. I think this is the really big challenge. It is a huge challenge. And, you know, dealing with each part. But the frustration
is in the nicest possible way, you don't know. I'm not saying that to be mean.
No. As I said to you, I
can't answer your question, Jo.
I can't answer the detail, but I think without doubt this is going to continue, and we are going to have to keep working on it to make sure that we get to a point that everyone is able to be remediated as required.
The Sunday Times.
I just need to get around this panel. Sorry, I know you feel passionately about it, John.
I mean, listening to Natalie, the fact that you've been so let down over this is just unforgivable. But thank you for speaking so openly and actually bravely, because I know there'll be many leaseholders like them in my own constituency who feel the same but don't feel that they've got the confidence to come out on television and speak about their personal circumstances in that way. So thank you for what you've done. I agree with Daisy, I agree with Tim. Having disagreed with Tim on the last question, I agree with him on this one. Now, I lead for the Labour Party on health, so I've not been involved in the particulars of the bill, but I will just speak more broadly and say, as it happens, I was on Question Time the week of Grenfell, and the panel and the audience were united in grief, and were united in our determination that something like that should never happen again. And I just find it utterly bewildering that here we are 4 years later, and this still has not been resolved in a satisfactory way. And the bill that has gone through Parliament has clearly been a hugely missed opportunity, and it's simply not fair for leaseholders, through no fault of their own, to be facing not only this great expense, but the ongoing fear of what might happen to them and their children and their families should something horrific go wrong. So this clearly needs fixing as soon as possible.
Danny?
My heart goes out to Natalie and the hundreds of thousands of people who will be disappointed by this news today, probably angry. I want to just step back a little bit about the fear that Jo talked about, because up and down our country, there are people, hard-working people, who are living in fear about their financial security. You know, we have carers, we clapped our carers, yet the majority of carers in this country are living in poverty. We haven't addressed child poverty. We haven't talked enough about free school meals. The issue after issue, we're sleepwalking into a poverty crisis. 1 in 5 British people were living in poverty before this pandemic.
But this isn't necessarily a poverty crisis. This is people who, I'm not speaking for everybody, people who've been able to afford to buy their own homes, and they found themselves in a position where, I mean, they may be forced into penury because of this, but they aren't in it because of a poverty crisis.
No, but we already know that in 2020, 700,000 more people fell into poverty as a result of the pandemic. And the problem is, if you take each of these issues and lay it upon each other, the insecurity that people feel, that will drive more people into poverty.